Good morning. Good to be with you here this morning. If you're a little newer, my name is Tomas, and I'm one of the pastors here at Connors Hill. You know, if you could have a superpower, what would it be? You know, if you were to ask kids, they would say, I'd love the power of flight, invincibility, super strength. One child told me super smelly farts. And I think it's because they had sisters, and so they were looking at, so any way I can assert dominance by my smell, I would. You know, as adults, to get older though, superpowers like the power to pay off my mortgage, my kids' education, whatever that looks like as adults. But how do you feel though, if I asked a different question, what if I asked you to give up your power as an adult for even just a day? Like you couldn't help yourself, you couldn't save yourself, you couldn't rescue yourself from a circumstance, that you were kind of rendered powerless. I would say you'd be rendered like a child again. How would you feel about that? And most of us probably wouldn't enjoy it. I mean, when I go to restaurants and a waiter younger than me calls me sweetie or sweetheart, I get very offended. You know, no one likes to be called or be treated like a child. Because I think often, you know, we think of ourselves, we're adults, we've got responsibilities, we've done certain things, we've accomplished stuff, we've got accolades, I'm able to pay a bill or whatever. We got responsibilities. It's condescending sometimes, or maybe often, to be treated like a child. And if you're like me, it kind of touches on some of those insecurities we all have of being noticed, of being wanted, of being able to do something, to be capable. We don't like not being included. We fight so often, don't we, to be recognized and, in a sense, to be self-sufficient. That's typically what it's like to be an adult, to grow up, and to be getting older. This passage, when I first read it a few weeks ago, the first thing was like, okay, the empty tomb before Christmas. Kind of strange timing, but let's get into it, right? And I'm reading it, and the thing that struck me really, clearly in this passage was, so you have these women that go to the tomb to rub spices on Jesus' body so the body doesn't stink very much. They do this with royalty and others. And they get there, and they realize that the stone has been moved, which would have been an extremely difficult thing to do, and the body's not there anymore. And what struck me was that so often throughout Jesus' life and ministries, you see the same thing happen. You see this powerful God, this God who's able to do these incredibly amazing things, and a very powerless us. They show up to do something with this king of theirs, with spices, but he's gone. There's nothing they can do. That seems to be kind of the motif the motif throughout the Gospels, is this very powerful God and a very powerless us. And it's this power dichotomy, if you read the story of Jesus, where a lot of people had issues, especially adults, mostly just adults. This concept of our inability and his ability, a lot of crowds dispersed. There's the story of this rich young ruler who says, walked away sad when he realized, when Jesus said, basically give everything up. And I still think to this day, that is actually probably a very big barrier for people now, is this idea of a God saying you can't do it on your own, and his ability to be the only one that does it. I mean, I think it means admitting for some of us, some of the things we need to be becoming clean about. Well, I don't want to do that. Or having to ask for help, or admitting that we can't do it ourselves. Or for those who maybe don't follow Jesus, maybe this is the reason why you feel there's a sense like, wow, to be a Christian means to be a fairly weak-minded kind of person. I mean, to be rendered powerless. So some avoid, some go overboard, and some try to just control if you're out of control. Because why? Well, as adults, right, we've got the money, we've got the opportunity, we've got power to kind of hide our needs better if we need to. Or we've learned how to avoid the reality of feeling powerless. No one wants to be treated like a child. No one wants to be treated powerless. But I want to remember, since forever, we have tried very unsuccessfully to convince ourselves that we are in control, when in reality, we are not. I mean, just think about it. We can't control death. You know, they say driving is the most dangerous human activity we take part in every single day. We're just trusting that you can get that. I mean, I know none of you are bad drivers, right? We can't always control circumstances. We can't always control what happens in our relationships. We can't always control success, and because I don't think there really is anything like a self-made person. And I think this is why admitting powerlessness is what I call is kind of like it would be the rite of passage to following Jesus. I mean, in Matthew, Jesus says, whoever wants to save their life or hold on to their control, they will lose it. But whoever loses their life or loses control, they're the people who are going to find life. Man, that's a hard thing. What's interesting, though, is Jesus actually goes a little further. He says, not only do I want you to admit you're powerless, I want you to think of yourself as the most powerless kind of person in society. I want you to think of yourself as a child. I mean, Matthew chapter 18, the disciples are asking Jesus, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? And this is Jesus' reply. See, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus is teaching his disciples to pray, what does he start with? This then is how you should pray. Our Father. A child. How do you feel about being treated like a child again? That's uncomfortable. Now, I got to tell you, though, this is not about being childish. Some of us are very good at that. It's about what we know about being a child. You think about it. Let's say you come up with a problem, you come up to a limit, you come into frustration, and you think to yourself, what does a child do if they've got a fairly good parent? Well, usually what they do is they take their big problems, their big frustrations, their limits, and they put their problems into hands that are much bigger than their own hands. In fact, we would say, a child, when they reach their limits or are frustrated and they keep holding control, we would call them childish, right? Or what would a good child do when they reach their limits? Not only would they put their problems into bigger hands, but often we find that kids, because they go to a parent or go to someone who cares for them, they often get to experience something much greater than themselves. In fact, we would say, some of us, or some people who would, again, hold on to control, not realizing that they're not in control, we would say, oh, they're acting a bit childish. They're kind of acting out. The other thing about a problem, too, is when a child puts their problem into big hands, and when a child experiences something greater than them, they're usually really good at telling other people about it. And we would say someone who holds on to those stories is probably going, well, that's a bit of a childish thing to do as well, if they know there's something out there. So what if right now, this morning, if you wouldn't mind doing a thought experiment with me? What if you just took some time this morning and thought of yourself again like kids, more specifically, like a child of God? How different would the perspective be? Here's why. Because like I said, here's something we know about kids, is that kids often take their problems and they give their big problems into much bigger hands. I don't know the last time you watched a child, maybe your own, or hopefully in a non-creepy way, another person's child, but I don't know the last time you've done that, but have you ever seen them when they come up to like their limits of problems? It quickly becomes very evident that kids do have limits, that kids have a lack of experience, that kids have lack of perspective. You see this all the time. And I mean, we know it's good for kids to face frustrations. We know it's good for kids to face limits, problems. You can't hide from it except for math, word problems. If you're a teacher, why? They're pure evil. There's no redemptive value. It's just nice teachers wanting to be evil. Anyways. But imagine, though, a young child for a moment, a young child playing Lego, but they can't understand the instructions, or they don't have the dexterity to put the pieces together. Or imagine a young 8-year-old girl who something bad has happened and they just feel so lonely. And in their limited perspective, they think to themselves, I'm going to be lonely for the rest of my life. We would say, well, of course, it's a limited perspective. It may not be real, but they're really feeling that. But now imagine those same kids refusing the help of someone with greater experience, greater resources, greater perspective and power, refusing help from someone who genuinely wants to and can help them walk through whatever issues they're facing. Like I said, a child choosing to continue believing the lie that they have control when they're faced with their own limits, we would call them, say, they're acting childish. Shouldn't they know they lack experience? Shouldn't they know they lack the wisdom, the maturity, and perspective? I mean, they're just kids. Okay, let me rewind and let me start this over again. We know it's good for adults to face problems, don't we? It's part of growing up. It's part of being human. We know problems are unavoidable. We know that problems are used to shape our character, our resilience, our faith. Like it or not, it's good for us to face frustration, to face our limits, to face problems. Problems are unavoidable. But wouldn't it be better, though, if adults faced their problems knowing there was someone in their life who had greater experience, greater perspective, greater resources, and greater power? I mean, let's read Colossians chapter 1. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things are created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. It sounds like there's someone we know who's got much bigger hands than us, who can help us look at our problems from a greater perspective rather than just our limited perspective. Because you know what? We're just kids. Like, imagine a young lawyer with a heavy caseload. They're drowning in their marriage. Or an 80-year-old woman who feels like she doesn't have any friends and believes for the rest of her life she's just going to constantly be alone. Or it's a seemingly self-made person who has everything but inside still feels like I've got nothing. Or maybe it's the set of parents worried about their kids, worried about their home, worried about their finances, their inability to solve problems. It's all these kinds of people. Now imagine if those same adults, none of you, but imagine if those same adults refused the help of a God with greater experience, resources, wisdom, perspective, and power from someone who can and wants to help them grow beyond their limit. I would say an adult choosing to continue believing the lie that they have total control over themselves and their world when they face their limit would be a child of God acting childish. Listen, our problems, your problems, man, they're real. They feel real. They really do. And they're big. But what if I reminded us that because we're children of God, there are bigger hands to put them in? I mean, again, let's read how Jesus teaches us to pray. He says this, our Father in heaven. Now, the word Father is an extremely intimate term that he's using here. It's meant to evoke this sense of a father who is intimate. It's meant to let us know that this is a father whose responsibility is to care for you, is to desire you, an openness for relationship, a provision. They will protect you. There's accessibility. It is a word that denotes warmth and intimate relationship. There's a desire for the Father to know you, but also for you to know the Father and you to understand your role as the child. Our Father in heaven. It's meant to evoke a relationship that God desires with each one of us and the desire that how he wants us to see him. Because I think if we bought into the lie that we can control, I mean, think about it. If I having the power to earn my own money, my own safety, my own accolades and status, if that makes me believe that I am in control or can control what's actually not in my hands, don't I set myself up for incredible frustration and destruction? When I do face my limits, when things don't go my way, when things that you thought would work out wouldn't work out. I mean, man, that's a lot for you to hold on to. It's a lot for me to hold on to. What happens when it all falls apart? Where's your peace? Where's your hope? Where's your joy? I mean, this is why Advent is so important to us, because it's a reminder that he is our peace. He is our joy. He is our hope. He is our love. He is our Christ. He is our Father. It's on him. Well, of course. You know why? Well, we're just kids. We lack the experience. We lack the wisdom, the perspective. We lack the power. We're just kids. To believe anything else, to keep ourselves from him because we don't like to lose control, Well, that's kind of childish, isn't it? I think that's why we hear when the women came to the tomb, it says they bowed down in worship because they realized, whoa, this is so much bigger than me. He's a good father. And do you know him even teaching about being a good father would have been incredibly countercultural at this time? So there is this professor of pediatrics and vaccinology. His name is Paul Offit. He worked at the University of Pennsylvania. He was a very strong voice against Christianity until he started actually researching medicine through scripture in the first century. And his heart changed towards God because of the strong advocacy of children in Jesus' life. This is what he writes. Independent of whether you believe in the existence of God, you have to be impressed with this man described as Jesus of Nazareth. He continues, at the time of Jesus' life, around 4 BC to 30 AD, child abuse, as noted by one historian, was the crying vice of the Roman Empire. Infanticide was common, abandonment was common. That's because children were property, no different than slaves. But Jesus stood up for children, cared for them, when those around him typically didn't. This then is how you should pray. My Father, who's in heaven. Because he cares for his kids. To be a child is to know that your problems are real. They're big. But we have a Father with much bigger hands. And we respond by just admitting our powerlessness, admitting when we reach our limits, when we're frustrated. Receive the Father's wisdom and his experience and his power. And what happens is that you begin to see that your perspective gets to be reorientated away from you, away from your circumstances, onto a good Father who loves you, provides. The second reason why I want us to suspend a little bit of belief, think of ourselves as children of God again, is because the second thing, it's that kids get to experience things that typically are much, much bigger than them. You know, growing up, I'm not sure if, the last time you thought about what you wanted to be when you were a child. I wonder what that was. I once, when I was 5, wanted to be a fire truck, and it's very impossible for me to be a fire truck. Kids sometimes are dumb, but some kids do things, they accomplish it. Ever meet a marine biologist? I always think, man, they probably watched Finding Nemo and they became a marine biologist, right? Like sometimes kids do, but I think as adults, as we grow up, as we get older, reality checks in for a lot of us. Because our sense of power goes from flying or unlimited strength to basically, it's measured by what we gain, what we achieve, what we have, and what we can secure. And that's not all bad in and of itself. Boring, yes, but not all bad. It's as we get older, though, I think the bigger problem is that our imaginations begin to diminish. And what happens is reality begins to set boundaries for what we can do, what we should do, and in fact, worse, what God can do and what God should do. You read through the Gospels and you find that his followers were routinely, over and over and over again, reminded that their power is nowhere near his. Their ability was nowhere near his ability, and their imaginations for what could be was no match for what he wanted and could do. But every single instance of their powerlessness being met by his immeasurable power was not so that he can embarrass us. It was an invitation. Invitation for them. Invitation for people like you and like me. Normal people, everyday people. To take part of that power that is so much greater than our own. I mean, you think of the birth. This young couple, virgin mother, poor, and this elderly woman who's never bore a child. And in the birth narratives, you have both of them, by the power of God, having a child. You have come up to multiplying food. Someone comes up with a lunch for 2 people. There's thousands of people. Jesus takes their meager resources and he feeds thousands of them with food left over. You think about the invitation to come follow him, and they give up some comforts, they give up some of their plans, of course, but he gives them a life filled with incredible purpose. You have these women that come to the tomb where they see loss, like, where is our hope? What they don't understand is they're now receiving resurrection life. So why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He has risen. Every single instant, whatever humanity came to offer God, he took it, and they were able to experience a power that was vastly more superior than their own. And I get it. There may be some of you here this morning who can tell me honestly, and not even lying, and not trying to brag about it, that you can have everything you want. You may have everything you need. If not, you may have the ability and the resources to get everything you want and everything that you need. Because almost everywhere we turn, our power and purpose is often measured in our own security, in what we have, and what we can achieve on our own, and what I can get for myself. This is what we would call the good life, is being in that position. So this may come across maybe a little offensive, and I apologize if it does. But if that's what you believe, that being able to get what you want, if that is the end goal of your purpose and your imagination, your purpose and your imagination is way too limited. I would say it's even a little childish. Because in the face of a greater power than them, whoever yielded their life to this man experienced routinely the power of his name in his life despite their limits. And what happened is that their whole purpose was reorientated. Their imagination was totally shifted and changed for what their life and what the world could be. It infused them with newer and greater purposes that were part of something way bigger than themselves. Because I think to be confronted with a power that resurrects life, a purpose that requires that kind of power, and then walk away for anything less, I think it's like a child opening up a present, playing with the box, and never the gift. There is only one person who will truly satisfy your and my desire for more. That will satisfy our feelings of inadequacy. It would be childish to believe any different. It actually has not worked any other way we've tried. No one is statistically becoming happier in culture by attaining more. The invitation to come follow me for each one of us is an invitation to, like a child, walk in the wisdom of and position and resources and potential and power and purpose of someone who is infinitely greater than us. So what would happen if you and I let Jesus' power determine your life, determine your day, determine your relationships? What if you let his life, his imagination determine your purpose, your coming and going? What could you imagine that he could do? What difference could that make in your sin, in your shame, maybe guilt you're feeling? Could maybe you find freedom? What difference could it make in your circumstances? Maybe you'd find peace, deliverance, help, counsel, all the things that he calls himself. What about in your relationships? If you found purpose again, Lord, would you expand my imagination for what it means to be a husband or a wife, a dad, a mom? Imagine what God could do to broken relationships to mend them again. Could you imagine if we looked at our relationships through the lens of God's power and his ability, his wisdom and his experience, and not limited by my limited imagination? Imagine the difference that could make as we think about our kids, we think about relationships, as we think about our neighbors, in our workplace, who you're called to, empowered to be, and who God is calling you to be in those places. What would happen if God of the universe invites you to give up your life so you instead could have his? How would that change your everyday? So the Christian concept of being powerless like a child to save ourselves is not weakness dressed up in a really nice fancy suit. When Jesus tells us to give up our lives for him, he's teaching us that a life given for him, like he gave his, is literally the DNA for proper justice work, for example. See, if you feel like you can attain justice for yourself, you're more likely to hold it over other people. But if you know that he came and forgave you for nothing that you've done, you are called to provide it for other people. There's no reason you can hold justice from other people. It is the DNA for proper mercy work. If you've been given mercy, we're commanded to give mercy. It is the DNA for proper social structures. There is right and wrong. When he forgave us of eternal sin, he calls us now to turn and offer forgiveness to other people. There's a command to, as you love God, love your neighbor. What does it look like to care and love our neighbor? It is the DNA for proper understanding of who each human is, highly valued and with great dignity, because if God is willing to die for them, that I must be willing to say something to them. It is the core and proper way of understanding hope, that because of Christ, this is not all there has to be. There's more. And I could go on, but all I want to say is what could happen if you and I let Jesus' power determine our life, our day, our relationships, our priorities, our purpose. What could you imagine he could do? What would your prayer life look like? How could that affect the way we come into Sunday mornings together? How would it define what's possible in your relationships? What you could do in your school, in your neighborhood, in your workplace? It's about laying our life down so he can empower our life with his experience, his power, his purposes. It means recognizing and inviting him to come, empower, and let that reorientate the reason why we live here, out there, and everywhere else. Because kids often get to experience a power much greater than themselves. That's a great thing about being a child. And thirdly, when all this happens, kids are just really good at showing and telling. Now, I'm going to extend our passage this morning. Verses 9 to 12, it says this: when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen laying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. Now, the honest witness of the disciples, you know it's very honest because, primarily, this witness would have probably either got them killed or deemed crazy, like a risen Christ. There's no way this could happen. All they were doing was witnessing to what they saw, to what they experienced. In fact, it was this testimony, with testimony of many others, that lend credence to the fact that Jesus probably did, in fact, historically resurrect when people are looking for evidence. The second reason why this would have been a crazy account and witness, and would have been a very honest, genuine one, is because you would not in the first century want the first witnesses to be women. At this point in the first century, women had literally no voice, no authority when it came to being a witness. It'd be the worst way to do it. This was a genuine retelling of what they saw and experienced, and it was just written down. This is not the way to tell someone a fake story. This is a genuine witness. And it's from this shared real experience that we see in the first century, we see that the church explodes. Because more and more people were just talking and telling about what was real, what was raw, something genuine. And that had the power to be infectious. And so he turns around. Before Jesus ascends, he says one thing in two different ways. He says to each one of his followers, first in Matthew, he came to them and said, "Go and make disciples of all nations." In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, he says, "And you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses." He tells us the same thing, go. Go and tell. And do you know what a witness is? Very simple. Let me tell you what a witness is. A witness is literally someone who points to what they saw. That's it. That's all you are. You point to what you saw. You point to what you felt. You point to what you experienced. That's all a witness is meant to do. And I think we've really complicated it. And I would say, I think we've got to become like children again. Have you ever had a child recount their day to you? It's sometimes crazy, but it's so genuine. It's hard to deny it. And you're just like, it's so hard to not be invested in it and to hear about it. And sometimes they tell you things that you wish you didn't have to hear. But you can't help it. They draw pictures, they do whatever they can just to tell you what really happened. It's so genuine and so real. And I would say, I think that's where we need to go. And this is why I love, there's a story in the Gospel of John of a blind man being healed. It's my favorite story. After being asked how he was healed from all these religious leaders that have known him since birth of being blind, and they even bring his parents into it, which, I mean, it's a big deal if you're an adult. And like, how did this happen? How did this happen? Who is this man? Who healed you? And I love the blind man's response. He's like, whether he's a sinner or not, speaking of Jesus, he's like, I don't know. But one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. I don't think there's a greater way to talk and tell about Jesus than that. I don't know. I can't explain it. And listen, you got to understand, I read a lot. I like knowing a lot of things, probably to compensate for my short stature, but I like those things. I think it's great to have great philosophical thinkers to talk about God and Jesus, and I think it's really, really healthy to do that, and it's effective. But at the end of the day, for each one of us, no matter what's really important to you, at the end of the day, do you and I have a very real, genuine, raw witness to what we know, what he did in your life? Because when I'm asked, at the end of the day, I'm going, Jesus, I don't have them all figured out, but I do know this. I was lost, and he keeps finding me. That's all I know. Some of you will draw pictures. Some of you will make music. Some of you will debate. Some of you will be in these places. But at the end of the day, is it just that? Do you know God every single day so that all you do is just point to who you know to be the truth and who to know you've been experiencing day after day, to those who don't know him yet? And so like a child, all we can do is receive him like they received their day, and to just passionately point to who he is. And that has the power to be infectious. It's hard to deny when you witness to a lived reality. Now, I get it. None of us likes to be treated powerless or like a child. But what if in our powerlessness we find our greatest hope, a resurrected Jesus who gives us life, hope, peace, joy, love? And all it starts with is this very simple prayer. Our Father. Our Father. So here's your on-ramps this week. I'd encourage you first to receive him, receive his life. These hands that are larger than yours as a child. And reorientate your perspective. Are you seeing it through your limited ways? Or are you offering it to a God whose hands are bigger? Second, I'd encourage you to receive him, receive the Father, and let it reorientate your purpose. Allow his power, allow his imagination, what he can do, to determine what your purposes can be like as you leave this morning and as you go into your day tomorrow. And lastly, would you receive him, receive the Father, and let it reorientate your passion to just talk and tell genuinely as a witness of who he is and what he's done in you every day. Why don't you stand with me this morning? We're going to respond in worship, but first, would you let me pray for you? Jesus, it is true. None of us really have this all figured out. That's not the point. God, would you help us recognize and be okay with the idea, Lord, we really are powerless for our own salvation. We're not in control. God, you are the creator and sustainer of life. God, would that not be a scary thing, but Lord, help us to entrust you with those realities of our life that feel so big, to entrust you with the control that I know I really want to hold on to, but to see you as a father with much bigger hands. Lord, would you help me to not let my inability determine the boundaries of what you can do. But as a child, let me come to you. Let us come to you in a place where we just receive you and let that reorientate our own imaginations for what you could do. In our marriages, in our families, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, wherever we find ourselves. And God, lastly, would you help me, would you help us to receive you daily? And God, not with a perfect collection of data, but like a child, just point as a witness to the things that we know to be true and that you've done. God, we love you. We thank you that you're for us and that you are, in fact, a good father. We love you. And God, we offer our lives and we pray that your will will be done in our lives. Amen.